John Scott here with Jonathan Acosta as the Bills with just really one practice this week after roster cuts. The 53-man roster, it's funny, there really weren't any surprises, so the talking points are a little less. But two of the cornerbacks, their health situations probably at the top of the list. We will begin with Tre'Davious White because he is on the active roster. Brandon Beane, yes and no, giving an update on where his status is moving forward.
Right. He said that it's not a season-ending injury, which I think by simply the fact of Tre'Davious White being on the initial 53-man roster with no IR designation, we kind of figured that, right? The other thing that Beane said was that he's not ruling him out for week one, which I think is a positive sign because he could have easily come out and said that, hey, we're taking it slow, sort of given an indication in his words that this team is maybe trying to slow play with Tre'Davious White. We didn't see him on the practice field today, so there's sort of kind of our first sign at where Tre'Davious White is, but like you said, just sort of this practice here this week, this team is going to really start ramping things up next week once it's game week for the Baltimore Ravens. And then the other cornerback, Maxwell Hairston, he is on IR, designated to return once the initial 53-man roster came out. I think for him it's a situation where, listen, he's a rookie. He's already missed all this time. They don't want to put him in a situation where they put him on the roster and he feels sort of the pressure to sort of get up to speed and come back quickly just to sort of make it in those first 4 weeks. So they give him that month to sort of just continue getting healthy, resting up, watching the defense, learning. We saw him out on the practice field watching the DBs go through individual drills. I think it's a good situation for Hairston where we've seen it in the past where rookies can kind of fall behind with the time that they miss. And even Sean McDermott said it at camp that, listen, Maxwell Hairston, he's going to have a lot of catching up to do once he's back on the field, but at least you give him the time to fully get healthy before once he's out on the practice field to sort of start getting those calluses as they've used with Cole Bishop.
Yeah, Cole Bishop. I mean, that's really the direct comparison here, but Bishop was back in time for the beginning of the season. He wasn't starting on injured reserve. Beane making it clear, listen, maybe he'd physically be ready to ramp things up week 2, week 3, but then you got to ramp him up for 2 to 3 more weeks because he hasn't done training camps. Let's just have him sit for the 4, do the rehab as he needs to. Then it's a 21-day window after that. It could be another 2 to 3 weeks. I would eye week 8 out of the bye week as probably the time that we would maybe see Maxwell Hairston in any capacity, and that doesn't even take into account how is Tre'Davious White playing, where is Tre'Davious White, and any other cornerback at the position.
Well, and it's going to be a very interesting time period sort of for the Bills right around week 7, week 8, because remember, they also have Michael Hoyt and Larry Ogunjobi serving that 6-game suspension. The way that the schedule shakes out this year is they play those first 6 games, so in those first 6 weeks, and then they have that bye week, sort of giving that extra week of practice for Hoyt and Ogunjobi to get up to speed before they get back to game action. So when you take into consideration activating Hoyt, activating Ogunjobi, activating potentially Maxwell Hairston in terms of him finally being back on the field during that 21-day window, we're looking at a situation where this Bills roster could look very different in that week 7, week 8 window as opposed to what it is right now, the initial roster leading into week 1.
And that's right around the trade deadline. And you oftentimes can hear teams talk about it's like a trade, it's like an acquisition when guys returning from an injury or suspension in this case at that time. There's also going to be corresponding roster moves that have to happen with those guys returning as well. So the midway point of the season will be very interesting coming out of the bye week. The other big story of the day, we knew Jordan Phillips was going to be on the Bills practice squad. Then this morning we found out Jordan Poyer is also returning to the Bills practice squad. Wow, we are used to reunions here with this team. These are two, and Poyer in particular, I think I would say, really caught me off guard.
It was funny. He sat down, and the first thing he said to the media was, nice to see you all. Nice to see some familiar faces. And I think the feeling was mutual, right? Seeing not just him, but the other Jordan as well, and Jordan Phillips. I think something that we've talked about is sort of the correlation, but also how different this is to Micah Hyde, another reunion that we saw last year. Hyde came in late in the season, I want to say second half of the season. He comes in. He's just on the practice squad. He knows that he's not really here to step out on the field and play and contribute to this defense in terms of what he's doing on the field, more here in sort of a mentorship role. I think Poyer and Phillips are embracing that sort of role. Phillips talking about how he has the same body type as a Deion Walker. So it's one thing for Deion Walker to get some coaching from the coaches, but it's another thing for him to hear it from a guy who has the same body type as him, that gets down low and what needs to be done on the practice field and during the games. With all that being said, both of them are also here feeling like they have a lot of gas left in the tank, ready to play and contribute for this team. So that's where I think this is very different than the Micah Hyde situation because, yes, for right now they're on this practice squad. We know what the 53-man roster is, but as we know, there's always injuries throughout the season. There's guys playing well, guys playing poorly. And so I think in a given situation, it's going to potentially be hard for Sean McDermott and Brandon Beane to sort of survey the landscape and see these two veterans that they have here on their practice squad, in Jordan Poyer and Jordan Phillips, and have a situation where maybe they need a guy to step in and not immediately look to those two guys having the experience in this defense, guys that have played well here in Buffalo before, as sort of the first options to sort of step in when they need to.
That's where we have to talk about expectations with both players here. We'll start with Phillips. It's a crowded defensive tackle room, so I would see maybe it's going to be harder. But I also think we saw Jordan Phillips here. We did not see Jordan Poyer. We saw him with the Dolphins. But what we saw from Phillips in short order in his latest return a year ago, he made plays. He had a sack in the AFC Championship game. You saw what he can do in a specific role in this defense, so I can see a little bit more of a path. I don't think it's going to be an instantaneous thing. He's certainly not going to jump over Deion Walker or TJ Sanders or Ed Oliver or even Daquan Jones. Maybe it's the Dwayne Carter if somebody gets hurt. Are you even going to keep 5 defensive tackles on the active roster? I don't know. But I see a clearer path than I do necessarily with Jordan Poyer. Because with Jordan Poyer, you got Taylor Rapp and Cole Bishop. We know what DeMar Hamlin is. And then you have Jordan Hancock, who is a rookie. I can't speak to what Jordan Poyer was doing last year because I was watching the Bills and I wasn't watching the Miami Dolphins. He admits he's 34, but as you said, he thinks he still has gas left in the tank. Injuries is probably the only way I think Jordan would get the opportunity. So it's great stories. Right now, it's a feel-good thing. We've had many of these. But I would temper the expectations for either of them, but Poyer in particular, to elevate and be impactful on the field.
I don't think either of these guys are going to come in and be starters for the full season, but I do think there's scenarios and situations where we could see them step into game action this year. I'll start with Phillips because we've talked about how injuries can set rookies back. We've talked about it with Max Hairston. We've talked about it with Cole Bishop. The same thing happened to Dwayne Carter last year. Dwayne Carter had an IR stint last year in his rookie season. Quentin Jefferson and Jordan Phillips both come in. And I think even with Dwayne Carter returning from injury, I think both of those guys were higher up on the depth chart once Dwayne Carter returned from injury, and I believe he was inactive at several points last year as well. Dwayne Carter comes in, still a young player, second-year player, but I don't think we've seen a lot from him in training camp and in preseason. So I do think specifically as it relates to Jordan Phillips, he still has to get up to speed physically and everything. But I think once that happens, with him having the experience in this defense, and again, him being above Dwayne Carter last year on the depth chart, it would not surprise me if we sort of see a flip-flop right there in terms of the depth chart situation. With Jordan Poyer, I think I am with you where you would need to see an injury. But again, the Bills have other defensive backs on the practice squad and everything. That's where it comes down to who are they looking to as that first guy up in an injury type of situation. I think it has to be Jordan Poyer, again, because of the experience that he has. He made sure to tell you, one of the questions that you asked him in one of his answers, he said, I've kept the receipts. Last year in Miami was a very difficult situation. He said he didn't want to get into the nitty-gritty of it, but it was a difficult situation, and so he's coming here, putting his head down, ready to work, but that he still feels like he has, again, a lot of gas left in the tank, and you could sort of see the motivation in his eyes and in the tone of his voice when he was speaking to the media today.
Other guys in the practice squad, basically most of the guys that were cut just yesterday. Shane Buechele, no Mike White on the practice squad, so just one quarterback, Frank Gore Jr., Christian Wilkerson, Daquan Hardy, Dane Jackson back on there. So that's the practice squad of things. Let's just touch quickly on the 53 because there weren't many surprises. Your thoughts, though, especially Tyrell Shavers is the main guy that's at the top of the list that really everyone says this is who you thought would get on, and he finally was able to push through.
That's right, and Brandon Beane sort of today sort of lauding how he's been able to sort of not just get on the same page with the quarterbacks, both of them, Mitch Trubisky and Josh Allen, but also his special teams contributions and how that's an essential role, not just for Shavers getting on the 53-man roster, but to potentially actually playing on game day as one of the 48, right? And so we were able to speak with him after practice, and he said that he found out he made the roster because he did not get a phone call telling him that he was cut. So I asked him, what was that feeling like once you finally realized that phone call wasn't coming? And he said, I'm happy. It was sort of a surreal moment, but the part that really got me was that he said, now is when the work begins. And I think Shavers has been a guy who's put his head down, put in the work these past couple of years, hasn't made the roster, has been on the practice squad, has continued working. We saw him finally get his chance to get into game action and had that touchdown last year against the Jets here at Highmark Stadium. Now you sort of think, if he had that sort of hunger, what's he going to be like now with this chance being rewarded on this 53-man roster? A different sort of body type at the wide receiver room from a Curtis Samuel, Khalil Shakir, Elijah Moore. Really, in terms of big-bodied receivers, it's just him and Keon Coleman. Even Josh Palmer, sort of a little bit different than Keon and Tyrell Shavers. So I'm personally excited to see what Shavers can do. Again, everyone that you speak to on the team lauds his work ethic, just seems to be really happy for the guy. So you sort of wonder how it's all going to sort of come together this season on the field for him.
I've had an agent tell me that they're point blank with guys in the Shavers kind of camp. You're on the team today. But as we said, week 8, week 7, there's some corresponding moves that are going to happen. I'm not saying this is a direct thing about Tyrell Shavers, but any of these guys who are rounding out the roster, Joe Andreessen's talked about it. He made the team, but he didn't feel comfortable until the playoffs that he was actually solidified on this roster here. I think a guy like Shavers is used to that, bouncing from the practice squad and whatnot. So he made it, but I don't think you're going to see anything change from guys like him and others that kind of are really the 52, 53 number guys on this team, because they know it can change at any moment.
Well, and specifically, you look at the wide receiver position in terms of like what's a position group where the number could change in order for the Bills to fit some of these guys back later on in the season, right? They have 6 wide receivers. I think the team would feel comfortable carrying 5, right? So Shavers obviously going to continue to put his head down and do the work. I think Elijah Moore would be the other potential cut candidate there from that position group, just because he's sort of redundant to a Khalil Shakir, Curtis Samuel. Shavers has that different type of body type at the position group, and he plays special teams. If Elijah Moore was in a sort of situation where the Bills didn't keep Brandon Codrington and he was out there as the main return guy, he maybe feels a little bit more secure in his job. So I think for Elijah Moore, he really needs to come out here and show, while he's on the active roster these first few weeks, that, listen, if he's only going to be here as a guy who's going to play on offense and catch passes from Josh Allen, he needs to go out there and really contribute in that phase of the game. Good hands, no drops, but also sort of that yak ability that we heard Joe Brady rave about in terms of the guys on this team. That's what they want, so that's what Elijah Moore needs to show when he's out there on the field this year.
The other thing that stood out to me with the Bills' initial 53, 8 of their 9 draft picks actually are part of the team. Max Hairston's on IR, so technically only 7 are on the active roster here. The only guy was a wide receiver, 7th rounder Caden Prather here. So as I was really unhappy with Brandon Beane making us stay later and drafting these guys, and I'm like, there's no way that you're going to keep another 6th and 7th round pick. Well, he didn't keep the 7th, but sure enough, he kept all those day 3 picks after all.
Yeah.
I guess he's smarter than me. Gosh darn it here. Now he's definitely going to trade for more 7th rounders for next year's draft. So that's going to do it for this week. Team probably going to disperse their final kind of power down moments before we hit the ground running. It's hard to believe here. Today is Wednesday, right? A week from today, we'll be back here, and it'll be all systems go to the Baltimore Ravens on Sunday Night Football inside Highmark Stadium. And, of course, I'm a company man, a game you will see right here on Channel 2. With Jonathan Acosta, I'm John Scott for Channel 2 Sports.